Guys, regarding tithing practice, let's look at this portion of scripture at Malachi again. Those preachers who strongly insist tithing is for today's Christians, you will notice at other times they will interpret Old Testament law, so-called the law, belongs to the Old Testament, Old Covenant, which has become obsolete because of Jesus Christ and his new covenant as established by his blood. But when it comes to tithing, they say it's still applicable. All right, that's a double standard. And I think anyone can see they're using this double standard just for the financial gain. All right. Regarding understanding of tithing, we can search online. In fact, there are probably more than half of Christians in the community. Catholics, I know, they don't really practice tithing. There was a time they sold indulgence. That was, during Martin Luther's time. But today, as far as I know, they don't teach or practice tithing. Some churches, Protestant churches, don't practice that also. But it just so happened in the few churches I visited and in New Christian Church I stayed for the longest. Past Joseph Prince is so adamant on the teaching of tithing, and he even claimed he heard from God on the teaching of tithing, the wealth being hidden in the word tithe, and how he heard God talk to him about Luke chapter 15, the widow of 10 coins, and this lost 10th coin being a tithe. Anyone who read the Bible and read it as it is would say that's not correct. But Joseph Prince has been very open about this revelation. This kind of convinced all his hearers to tithe. Now, giving and offering is practiced everywhere. That we have to understand and accept. But this tithing, now let's just ponder a little bit more on this scenario. Say, in a small church, the pastor just display the tithing envelope as a part of the practice. I mean, the pastors know no better. They didn't study a little bit deeper about the tithing, so they just leave the tithe envelope there. And there comes a sincere seeker of God. And the first thing he saw is a tithe envelope. It's not even a pamphlet which may say why we say we are sinners or why we believe that we need God in this life and for the life to come. But instead, they display a tithing envelope prominently at the doorway. So this sincere seeker or believer, new believer, if he noticed this, of course he can ignore, but say this, he's a very sincere and genuinely seeking truth in his newfound faith, he will have to come to reconciliation about this giving of 10% and his new faith in Jesus Christ. Either he will do it wholeheartedly, or he has to think critically and realize it's a hoax. Many of the believers would say it doesn't harm much. But you see, all those super rich preachers in the US, St. Paul is not so much. All right, Joseph Prince there was a time he drew a $500,000 salary. Regarding that, people's opinions are very divided. I would say, for a true pastor, for the flock, if there is just one poor widow, one poor brother who is living at a standard lower than the average Singaporeans, then for the pastor, the only appropriate, being a pastor, let's remember, the shepherd of the flock, the only way is to consider this member's situation and do something about that, instead of teaching them to tithe and give, while they themselves live a rich and abundant life, at the same times denying that this financial supply comes from the members. You see, these preachers, they often have no problem declare that all the blessings are from God. And at the same time, believers, simple-minded, have no problem believing that they are giving to God. All right? I mean, our mind can be so stuck in this. You just show this scenario to an outsider, they will say, it's a hoax. You just look at the church, there are two classes. One is this ruling class, and the other is this ordinary class. That's not the church. That's not the church. All right? Again, regarding tithing, there are many things we can research from the Old Testament. Some people say it should be 33% or 37%. Some say 27%. All that, I think, is not so relevant. All right? Now, when it comes to how to deal with this, I think the right way is to call Singapore government to investigate into this and put a stop to this practice. I mean, my personal experience, being a young believer, over 10 years, giving faithfully, monthly, religiously, all the while thinking, giving to God, living a very ordinary, below average kind of, life. I mean, I just compare my, by the way, how well we live this earthly life actually doesn't matter much. Bible says we have food to eat, we have clothes to put on, we should be content and thank God. But we just imagine if it's a poor widow. You remember the poor widow? How she gave 2 mites. And a lot of such preachers, they have no problem interpreting that portion as Jesus commanding the poor widow's giving, and they encourage the members to give in a similar manner. You imagine such poor widows give all their money. How do they feed their children, their family? That's not how a Christian faith works in such situations. These rich pastors, they ought to think about how to look after the poor widows. Paul in his letters talk about this. But in reality, in many of the churches today, it's just, opposite. Or at least in the churches I visited, I don't see the helping of the poor from the church. So I think it's right to voice up, maybe to SG security, voice up there's such a scam in the churches. Put a stop to this. You see how the police force is willing to protect other citizens, people living in Singapore, from being scammed. I think they should do something about these preachers. All right. Probably I will illustrate more on this path in the next video. The reason I propose this because many a time such preachers, they're not afraid of believers. They're not concerned about believers' conscience being injured. They're not afraid of being condemned by God, but they are afraid of the earthly authority. You just see how they use earthly authorities' paperwork as a cover up for their greed. The auditor's report, we all know, is a minimum requirement in a good governance, but to them that's a maximum. As long as the report is good, it is satisfying to God, which is not. All right. So today, just a little bit more on this, my realization that tithe is a scam and we should do something about this. Thank you.